Hi, my name is Kaylee Warner. I'm in Studio Thinking ARU 430. It is November of 2021 and I am working in multiples. So I began my exploration with stamping vegetables as the book suggests. I started with putting tempera paint on my plexiglass ink plate and experimenting on construction paper as well as mixed media paper. There are a wide range of papers that are appropriate for printmaking. I investigated pressure and the amount of paint. So the differences in these amount of pressure in paint gives different visual effects on the quality of the print. I realized my preference was firm, even pressure and a moderate amount of paint, not too much or too little, allowing the viewer to see the quality and detail of the matrix. Reflecting, I noticed these organic and alive materials produce stagnant prints. So I began to turn them and turn the paper as I printed to create texture and movement, which produced almost a painterly effect and created ideas that are less about the object being printed. After further exploration in the chapter, I began cutting into the material to create new shapes. I could experiment with different forms and shapes and composition because I also started to use various colors and various matrices on one page. And here are some results that I found exciting. I practiced registering my print, which is aligning the matrix with the paper and with previous prints to create continuous line and shape. There is a large learning curve to this and takes practice, patience, and thoughtful planning and envisioning. Then I tried block printing ink, which is more thin and almost elastic. The results were that this ink captured far more detail of these organic materials than tempera paint did. I was drawn to the quality of this ink and used it a lot more as I went on to capture tight and small details. So Mark Bradford is an artist I've been looking at for a long time. His abstraction looks out into the environment and he considers his tools and material and inspired me to do so as well. He says, I wanted to use materials that had to do with the social fabric of the time we live in and not just the history of art. Also, Aurora Robson, from who we saw in class a few days ago, had students clean up the river and think of things they collected as treasure, giving them discarded objects value. And finally, Anne Grant used other material, in her case molten glass, to create various textures. And she used gestural movements. I watched videos of her. She uses these very gestural movements to expand her range of visual effects. So I took all of these ideas into my next phase of my project. So living in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, an area that's been highly impacted by the coal industry and subsequently the lack of that industry, I went down to the river and took a walk collecting objects deposited on the banks, which are seen here. Again, I followed the book and I've tried paint first. These inanimate objects had an overwhelming aliveness to them. I rotated them as I printed as many ways as I could, experimenting with a range of effects that they could create. And as I did so, I could feel the story they wanted to materialize. I could sense the weathering degradation these objects experienced as they traveled and tumbled downstream, as they were irregularly shaped. We get ideas about degradation processes in the relationship between human and the natural world. And I just kept persisting and exploring and stretching as I did so. So these are by far the most expressive and unusual results I found. They created frantic feelings and unstable moods. They range in effect from geometric and consistent repetition, again noting the varying pressures and amount of paint, to more organic forms, same with the pressure in the paint. And we are unable to separate these objects from the environments that they emerged. They are erratic, textured, and we can sense the river and see so many shapes in the negative space. The skateboard wheels were unable to move, so I dragged them. I then tried block printing ink, which produced similar effects to the vegetables, but since these objects are irregular, the thickness of the tempera paint was actually beneficial in creating depth and texture, in my opinion. But the detail here is more fine, and I could see some people really enjoying this and that high contrast between black and white as well. So the screen printing ink was perhaps the best because it's so thick, and I could use the brayer more as a knife to spread the ink. And I also tried a split fountain technique, which is utilizing 2 colors. And just to see the visual effect, I tried using the onion that still had drying block printing ink on it, and I mixed it with a limited amount of screen printing ink to get an almost graphic effect. So then I moved on to carved blocks. The styrofoam was too thin, in my opinion. It was not very durable, and I found it to be limited in its design ability or capability. On the other hand, the linoleum was too thick and didn't give the flatness that I was envisioning it would. I was hoping for more of a screen printing look, which I've had experience in working with, but actually I found it to be very uneven and print very irregularly, and that's probably a reflection of my skill in that material. However, block printing was my happy medium because it was easy to carve and had a flexibility in design, so I'll focus on that moving forward. Other materials needed, I did try screen printing ink, but that was too thick. Block printing ink is great for the reasons that I previously mentioned. The brayer rolls the ink out onto this plexiglass ink plate, and then onto the matrices as well. The linoleum cutters have several blades to create different effects, and for safety we use a bench hook, which is this right here, to hold the matrix in place. The gap in the middle provides for a place for the corners to rest to get better angles as we carve. And so the bottom hook here holds the tool to the table. You do need a straight edge on the table, so this photo is just for demonstration purposes. So other inspiration that I pulled was from Lauren Custero. She talked about individual pieces that she works on that make up a larger one, and talked about how they're either joined by distance or physical connection, but either way they have this relational interaction, which meant a lot to me. And she has this emphasis on layers with detail. And similarly, Jill Parisi is working with natural imagery, which struck a chord with me, and her remarkably detailed pieces created these ecosystems. Again, spoke to me as an environmentalist. So on the left is registration practice, and on the right is beginning to explore layering, and these are from the styrofoam. So then I moved to repeating patterns and alternative approaches. So printmaking requires several other skills like drawing. The drawings I created, I then decided to push further once I started to carve to better explore the technique of the linoleum cutters and the various widths and depths that could create, and wanted to see how it would translate once printed. So printmaking requires envisioning and planning. Again, I'm working with ideas of decomposition in the natural world, hence the imagery, and I also took inspiration from PA Dutch folk art, hex signs as well. So here's my print. The registration was not perfect, but it was a great exploration. Then alternating printing techniques of repeating the print was magical, surprising, and let me play with composition even more. And here's the other examples. And I really got to play with composition, as you could see in the last images as well as here. These I could rearrange the series after printing them. And in addition, each time you print, you have to make intentional stops to change color or other things, and it gives you time to slow down, reflect, and continue to envision. And I continued to play with composition. And then I dove into collagraphs. So my smooth collograph was the first one I did following the book, which did not print very smooth. My textured pieces came from the Lehigh River collection I did as well. And I thought that turned out fabulous. I just thought it created this interesting environment landscape. And I continued and I used leaves, found objects, Mod Podge, and hot glue to hold it down onto corrugated cardboard. And I persisted to move past my first composition. And I thought this was interesting because the leaf prints create drastically different visual effects that are delicate and peaceful, creating ideas of the naturalness and seamlessness that environmental processes have that contrast the harsh visual effects that were created through those human-invented remains that I found. My shoe collagraph asked symbolic questions and proposed symbolic meanings of who walks in these shoes. So my first print was just merely a pressing, whereas this one I made the shoes dance. And then I expanded onto tissue paper for more size and just different effect, which I found to be really beneficial. I used a rubber tube to print, and I integrated all of these explorations across a series, utilizing tissue paper, both with rubber block prints and block ink and collagraphs, and utilizing screen printing ink, excuse me. And so there's another example, a close-up of that detail. You can see the block and then the screen printing ink with the other material, the found objects. Experimenting with printing on cardboard is what came next, and I continued to explore and build up these enmeshed layers. So I stopped here as I ran out of time. I thought, why just use cardboard as my matrix when I could print on it? But I have so much more to do. I felt like I had a major breakthrough as a visual artist doing this project. I'm headed back to continue to experiment as printmaking is becoming my new love. I love the slowed down process, the reflectiveness, the envisionment that goes along with this type of work. And thank you so much for watching my presentation.